What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're looking at Psalm 139, 140, 141, and we're also beginning 1 Corinthians 10 in the New Testament. And today, Psalm 139 is actually a really famous chapter. You might have read it before. And what it talks about is how God is in control of all things, how God is knowing everything all the time, that he is everywhere all the time, that he's sovereign over everything that happens. And in fact, he's sovereign over everything that happens in our lives. And one of the most famous sections of this talks about how God forms us. And it says, God knew us even before we were born. It says, you were formed, for you, God, formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. So you see how, as you read this, you gain a great appreciation for how God cares for David, as specifically as the author of this psalm, but also for each one of us. That God knows and cares and loves his people. And that should be a comfort to you, because our world preaches the message that what you do in this life doesn't matter and that there's no consequences, so you can do whatever you want. This psalm says the complete opposite, that God knows, God cares, and God is actually sovereign and in control of everything that goes on. But the response, the end of this psalm, basically says, God, please search me, know me, look into my heart, look into my life, and tell me and reveal to me, is there any evil way in me? I don't want to live like the wicked people that are described here in verses 19 to 22. It says, I don't want to be like the people who hate God. I want to be like the people who love you. So God, search my heart. Tell me if there's anything wrong in me. That's a helpful prayer to think through as you read this. As you think, am I one of those evil people that hates God? Am I one of those people that are always doing the wrong thing? Or am I one of the people like David who prays this prayer? I think if you pray this prayer, that'd be really helpful for you today as you think through how God is going to reveal to you your own sin, which again, these Psalms actually continue to talk about that. Psalm 141 in particular today says, do not let my heart incline to any evil, to busy myself with wicked deeds in company with men who work iniquity, and let me not eat of their delicacies. Basically saying, I don't want to live like the people who are rejecting God. Psalm 141 is all about that. In fact, if you go back to Psalm 140, it actually talks about those evil people again, and I think that's the common theme through all these chapters today. But Psalm 140 actually talks about how David is actually being persecuted, and he says, I'm being attacked by these evil men. What should I do? And then verse 6 says, but I say to the Lord, you are my God. Give ear to the voice of my pleas for mercy. God, listen to me, please. He says, except if you think about those sinful people that are doing the wrong thing, God, just bring their own sin back on their head. Just punish them for what they've done. Let them feel the consequences that naturally come from going into those sinful ways. And that's what he says in verse 9, and he goes on. But as you think this through and think about Psalm 139, 140, 141, if the common theme through these Psalms is that we want to live before God in a way that's honoring to God. One of the ways we do that is Psalm 139 by praying to him and asking for help with that. Also, Psalm 141, praying and asking that God would set a guard over our mouth, keep us from saying things we shouldn't, that he would guard our hearts so that our hearts wouldn't want to go in directions that are evil. I really think that as you think through your own life today, think, how can I live righteously? How can my life be more like how God wants it to be? And these Psalms help us get there. It shows us we need to be talking to God about that. I think so many people say, I wish I could, kill this sin. I wish I could avoid these unrighteous things, but I just can't. Right? Well, the question is, are you asking God? Are you pleading with God? How often do you pray asking for deliverance from that sin? How often are you repenting of that sin? How often are you confessing to other people? I think the problem for a lot of us is we don't want to avoid those sinful things because they actually bring us some joy in some way. And this says, look, God, search my heart and see if there's any evil way in me. I don't want to live in those evil ways. I want to live for you. That's a helpful way that this psalm teaches us how to pray to God and what to tell to God in our prayers. So, all right, that's our Old Testament reading. In the New Testament, we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, which is very interesting today because I think as you read 1 Corinthians 10, one of the things it does is it teaches you how to read the whole Bible. That's one of the things it does. It talks about how in the Old Testament, and you're going to read the first few verses, you're going to be like, what is going on here? I thought we were talking about self-control and living the Christian life. Why are we talking about these Old Testament figures? Well, Paul says in verse 6, now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. I think it's so interesting, that phrase, that we might not desire evil. That's the same phrase that we just read in Psalm 141. God, keep my heart from wanting to have any of these evil desires and go in these evil ways. I think it's super interesting, and I love that we have those together today, because what we see here is the bad example that some of the Israelites set when they said, I want to live my own life, I want to be my own God, I don't want to listen to God's rules. And it says they grumbled, they put Christ to the test, they committed sexual immorality, they did all these things with idolatry, they did all these terrible things. And the response for us should be verse 11. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. So that's why if anyone says, hey, you shouldn't care about the Old Testament, you shouldn't read the Old Testament, it doesn't matter what happened there, they do not know the Bible, because 1 Corinthians 10 is very clear. We need to look to those old stories as examples for us. We need to take things from them. We need to look at what happened to them and say, I want to live differently because of what I learned through Moses and through the wilderness wandering and through Abraham and David and all these characters that we see in the Old Testament. And then he actually goes even further. He says, if any one of you Christians in Corinth, if you look at what happened back then and you think, I would never sin like that, I would never commit that immorality, I would never grumble against God like that, I would never put Christ to the test. He says, if you think you stand, take heed, be careful, because you're about to fall. If you think that you've moved past all that and there's no way that you would ever sin, like idolatry, like immorality, like grumbling, like all the things mentioned here, he says, be careful. If you think that you would never do that, take heed, because you're about to take a big fall. But he says this in verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you. No temptation has come around you and overtaken you that's not common to man. So all of the temptations you face today are not unique to you. You don't have any temptation that's like, I'm the only one that's ever felt this temptation. He says, actually, even in the Old Testament, these people had similar temptations, but God is faithful. Just like he was then, he's also faithful now. And he won't let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he'll also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. And I think it's helpful to think through the stories that were just given, specifically one of the stories that the wilderness wandering people, a lot of them committed idolatry, but there were others that didn't commit that idolatry. Some of the Levites in particular, they did not engage in all the immorality that the other people did, and God saved them. That remnant, he used them, and they actually became the priests in part because of what happened here, how all the nation of Israel, they failed and they did what was wrong, but these Levites, they did what was right. It says here, God is faithful. He'll provide the way of escape. We see that example played out in the wilderness wanderings. When most of these people chose what was wrong and sinful, some of them didn't. I think that fits so well with what we're reading today, especially in Psalm 139. We don't want to be those idolaters. We don't want to be those people that are grumbling against God. We want to be the people that are doing what God says. And I just want to tell you that if today you make choices to do what God says and to call out to God and ask for help, those are prayers that God wants to answer. The prayer to search me, try me, know my thoughts, see if there's any grievous way in me. That's a prayer that God wants to answer in your life today. So I encourage you to pray that through this morning as you're reading this and as you're thinking about it. So thanks for reading with us. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.